We've got breaking news from the National Football League. Gardner Minshew has won the battle for the Raiders' starting quarterback position. Get excited. Coach Antonio Pierce made the announcement following Saturday's loss to the Cowboys in Week 2 of the preseason. Minshew was in a competition with Aiden O'Connell, and both had their struggles against Dallas. Minshew was just 10 of 21 for 95 yards. O'Connell was 14 of 20 for 96 yards and a score. But he also threw a 69-yard pick six in the fourth quarter. The Raiders finished the preseason versus the 49ers. They play at the Chargers in Week 1 on CBS. Let's bring in NFL analyst Ryan Wilson for more on this. Ryan, your reaction here, because O'Connell played well with the Raiders last year, played 10 games with them, went 5-5. Gardner Minshew, of course, was with the Colts. You surprised that it was Minshew that got the nod over O'Connell in this situation?
A little bit, Jeremy, but again, it feels like the lesser of two evils. We're not talking about any of these quarterbacks, potential Pro Bowlers anytime soon, or headed to the Hall of Fame. And part of me, and this is what I'm going to keep talking about until we see how the season unfolds, part of me wonders if the Raiders are going to regret not trading up from 13 to go get one of these quarterbacks, the 6 quarterbacks that went in the first round. That's water under the bridge, so you have to play with the guys currently on the roster, and that obviously includes Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And you talked about the stats in the first 2 preseason games. They were average to slightly above average. O'Connell outplayed Gardner yesterday, but you mentioned the pick 6, which doesn't look good against starters or backups. So again, and you know, I keep coming back to Davante Adams, who got traded out of Green Bay, got to play with Derek Carr, and then they took Derek Carr and sent him to New Orleans, and Davante Adams was visibly frustrated throughout last season. I don't know if that's going to change, and I keep coming back to that because you're playing in the same division as Justin Herbert when he's healthy. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes. The Denver Broncos went out and drafted a quarterback in Bo Nix, who will likely be the starter Week 1 as well. So they have to figure this thing out offensively. I think one of the other issues, Jeremy, is Luke Getsy is the new offensive coordinator. He came from Chicago, where Bears fans were annually frustrated with how he dialed up plays for his offense there. You have to hope the defense and Matt Crosby can do a lot of the heavy lifting. And you know as well as I do, hope is not a plan, but I understand going with Gardner because he's slightly more in terms of a veteran presence that he provides. But to your point, Aiden O'Connell did pretty well under trying circumstances a year ago, too.
We talk about the preseason not necessarily meaning a lot, but based on what we saw last night, there seemed to be some weight to it. How much do you think what we saw last night played into Pierce's decision?
If I had to put a percentage on it, I would probably say 35% preseason and then 65% based on the body of work throughout their careers. And, you know, we shouldn't sleep on the fact that last year Gardner Minshew came into a tough situation in Indianapolis after Anthony Richardson went down early in the season, and he played pretty well. And that team probably won more games than a lot of folks expected. Some of that has to do with Shane Steichen, the first-year head coach, and he had a lot to do with the offense. So I'm sure that weighed as well when Antonio Pierce had to make that decision. And we've seen journeyman Gardner Minshew make various stops throughout the NFL and play 3, 4, 5, 6 games in a season and hold his own. He's not a long-term starter, and I'm sure that the Raiders understand that, but their hands were tied. They weren't going to move up. Their new GM, Tom Telesco, has a history of staying put on draft day, so they were going to sit there, and they took a great player in Brock Bowers, who's going to need to have a big season too, by the way, and they decided to roll with these quarterbacks. So you can't convince me that Gardner Minshew will be the 17-game starter, even if he's healthy throughout. I think we might see some Aiden O'Connell, but that's who they're going with for now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem at this point in time like Antonio Pierce is married to this decision for the length of the season, but it is his first season with the Raiders. That total sitting at 6.5. It's actually favored to go over that for this team. But Ryan, what do you see as the ceiling for this Raiders team year 1 under Antonio Pierce?
If we get Gardner Minshew from a year ago, I think that they could hit that number north of 6.5. They could get 7, 8 wins. Winning season feels tough in this division, Jeremy. I think the Broncos are going to be better. We'll see how much better, but we know what we're going to have in the Chiefs, and I think that Jim Harbaugh has a history of winning football games when he's in the NFL with good and not so good teams. When he first got to San Francisco, I think they had won 5 games a year before he got there. Then they just ripped off a bunch of NFC Championship appearances, including the Super Bowl. So I think, you know, 7 or 8 wins feels best case scenario for the Raiders right now, and it's going to be largely due to how the quarterback position plays. Like I said, I think the defense will be better. We know what Max Crosby brings. Malcolm Koonce has played well. They drafted Tyree Wilson last year, the edge rusher, who was hurt for much of the year. So that side of the ball you feel okay with. It's just sorting out everything on the offensive side of the ball, and maybe Brock Bowers can be a difference maker there. Michael Mayer in year 2, and of course Devontae Adams. Perhaps he can have a resurgence of sorts with Gardner Minshew now under center.
Ryan Wilson joining us to discuss the breaking news from the NFL. Gardner Minshew has won the battle for the Raiders starting quarterback job. Thanks very much, Ryan. Always good to see you. And of course, we mentioned the Raiders next week finish the preseason against the San Francisco 49ers. They're 0-2 so far, so looking for that first preseason win. And then they are on CBS when the season begins September the 8th. They have their opening game at the Chargers on CBS and Paramount Plus at 4:05 p.m. Eastern Time.